further debate? The member from Newmarket, Aurora.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, it's not often that I would refer to the Toronto Star in my speeches in this legislature, but I think it's appropriate that I begin with this quote from the editorial in the Toronto Star today. I quote, "Instead of trying to convince skeptical Ontarians that these decisions were mere missteps and things aren't as bad as they seem, McGuinty and his energy minister ought to come clean and issue a frank apology for what is, at root, a political fiasco driven by electoral considerations." End of quote. Speaker, the issue before us is a very serious matter. And you ruled in your ruling on the point of privilege that was put forward by my colleague, Mr. Leone, that there is in fact a prima facie case of privilege. Now, for the benefit of my constituents who have been following the debate here, I want to refocus this debate and remind us all what this debate is about. Because I heard from members of the government over the last 2 days references to intentions to impugn the personal integrity of the Minister of Energy, many suggestions that somehow, because we are raising this important point of privilege and pointing out what the implications are to our ability to do our work as members of the official opposition whose job it is to hold the government accountable. I want to make it very clear that no one in this place has even suggested that either the personal character of the Minister of Energy should in any way be questioned. No one has questioned his past performance as Attorney General. No one has questioned his career as an attorney. We are here to speak to the point of privilege that you, sir, as the Speaker, ruled was in fact a legitimate point of privilege for the members of this House. And I want to, for the record, and for those who are observing this debate, to read your conclusion. I quote, "The Standing Committee on Estimates was unquestionably entitled to request the documents sought from the Minister of Energy, and in the end, the Minister had an obligation to comply with the Committee's call for those documents. The Committee did not accept the Minister's reasons for withholding the documents and persisted in its demand during an extended period of time. I am therefore satisfied that a prima facie case of privilege has been established." End of quote. Speaker, we want to thank you for that ruling, because at the heart is the ability of this chamber, the members of this legislature, to do their job. I want to also read into the record from O'Brien and Bosch, where there is a distinct differentiation between a point of privilege and contempt of the legislature. I quote, "It is important to distinguish between a breach of privilege and contempt of Parliament. Any disregard of or attack on the rights, powers, and immunities of the House and its members, either by an outside person or body or by a member of the House, is referred to as a breach of privilege and is punishable by the House. There are, however, other affronts against the dignity and authority of Parliament which may not fall within one of the specifically defined privileges. Thus, the House also claims the right to punish as contempt any action which, though not a breach of a specific privilege, tends to obstruct or impede the House in the performance of its functions." Speaker, end of quote. The reason that we are debating today is not because of any individual's character or reputation. It is specifically because a committee of this legislature attempted for months to get important documents that it felt was important to its work. And the Minister of Energy repeatedly refused to produce those documents. The committee relied on this House and the rules of procedure to have access to that, and unfortunately, Speaker, that's what it took. We would not be here today if the Minister of Energy had simply complied with the request of that committee months ago and provided the documentation that involved a multi-billion-dollar transaction in this province. Multi-billions of dollars are at risk on the green energy policy of this government. The Minister of Energy chose to hide, not to disclose those documents. That's why we're here. And I want the people in this province to know that's why we're here. And for any member to stand in their place and suggest that somehow this is a personal attack shows once again what this government's focus is. And it's not transparency, and it's not accountability. It is all about putting up a shield between what the public deserves to know and what it wants the public to know. What are they hiding? That's the question. And Speaker, this is against the backdrop of a file I know quite well, and it's called Orange. And Speaker, for months we have been conducting hearings on the Orange scandal in this province, and what has the government done? Nothing. At every turn we were obstructed from access to information. The minister repeatedly told us she didn't know anything about it, and yet eventually, after a great deal of effort, after demanding documentation be produced for that committee, what did we find out? We found out the minister knew full well. There was document after document that disclosed that there were briefings of the minister, the premier, and staff from the top down to the bottom. And guess what the government did? They did nothing. And multi-millions of dollars were wasted in the health portfolio. Now, we have a very consistent demonstration of a minister of this government, rather than be transparent and rather than work with the committee of this House, chose rather to use every excuse not to disclose that documentation. I repeat again, Speaker, and to those who were observing this debate, understand what members of this government are trying to do when they suggest that somehow we are disrespecting honorable members by simply following the rules. Had the Minister of Energy produced the documents for the committee when it was asked for, we would not be here. And the Minister of Energy would not be facing the prospect of this House voting a contempt motion and declaring and demonstrating to this House that we as elected representatives in the Parliament, representing our people, our voters, the taxpayers of this province, that they still have responsible people who will represent them and will not take no for an answer from a government that wants to hide important information. It's about preserving the credibility and integrity of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. That's why we're debating this. Not a personal attack against any individual member. It's about what the minister in his capacity as Minister of Energy chose to do. And that is not to disclose information.
Who made him do it?
Speaker, I had a very interesting meeting with someone for whom over the years I grew to respect highly. His name is Walter Kimmerly. He was the president, CEO of Birkin Construction. He's an individual who came to this country as an immigrant, chose Canada, as he told me, because of the prospects of a democracy that would be stable. And from time to time he would call me because we immigrated from the same country, his family and mine. He and my father were friends, and they would often talk about why they chose the difficult path to immigrate to this country. And they both knew what it was like to live under a government that was essentially a dictatorship, and essentially held its citizens in contempt. And they made the decision to choose Canada and Ontario. And Walter would often call me and he'd want to talk politics. And I'll never forget the last time I saw him, because unfortunately he passed on at the age of 80 last April. And the last meeting I had with him, he said, "Frank, I want to give you some advice." He said, "The next election you go into, your party should have as its motto accountability and transparency for Ontario." And he said, "I'll tell you why." He said, "The more I see what is happening, whether it's at our provincial level or whether it's at federal level of government, the very institution that should be there to protect citizens is more interested in preserving its power rather than representing the people who have elected them." And he said, if that's the direction that we're going to go, Ontario and Canada will be no different than the country we left. And he said, we're taking for granted that we have a parliamentary institution that has as its core the cornerstones, if democracy is to function effectively, accountability and transparency. And Speaker, over the last number of months, those words have become incredibly insightful. I think they're very, very relevant to this debate. You know, I've heard a lot of talk about partisanship. And it's interesting how this government over the last number of months, every time we in opposition raise an issue about how the government is not doing its job, or we expose the lack of oversight, we expose the lack of accountability, we challenge the opaqueness of how the government is doing its business, we are accused of partisanship. How many times have we heard the Premier stand in this place and say, well, in answer to the member, of course, that's a partisan attack. We have the public interest at heart. I raised a point of privilege with you, Speaker. I don't think you agreed with me at that time, but maybe eventually one of these days you will on this issue. Because I believe it is impugning motive to a member in this House when someone is allowed to stand in their place and say what you're saying is partisanship and what I'm doing is in the public interest. I still fail to understand how an honorable member is allowed to get away with that. Look, all of us are here. We may not have the same political views. We may not have the same philosophical views. We may disagree on how we get from here to there or how we would serve the public interest. But because we disagree, I don't believe gives anyone in this place the right to suggest that our motive is wrong. Our motive is what is in the best interest. I will accept that the Premier and every member in the government has pure motive. But I will also reserve the right to disagree with how they get there. And I will also disagree right to the last ounce of debate in this place that what the Minister of Energy did for months on end by ignoring the will of the committee that was asking for information. I will disagree that the minister did the right thing and acted in the public interest. Speaker, the public interest is always based on accountability and transparency. And the minute that any member of this House or any member of any government or any bureaucrat at any level of government chooses to suggest that the public is not mature enough to absorb the information that is all about them, we are on the brink of losing the very essence of what democracy should be: open and transparent and accountable. Government is there to serve the people. Government is not there to set its own standard of performance. We have a responsibility, the official opposition, to ensure that we can go back to our constituents and tell them what we did to hold the government accountable. And, Speaker, I'm going to refer again to the Toronto Star. I think there's been an awakening at that place. Either that, or, it's either that, or this government has gone so far in the wrong direction that even the Toronto Star has to say enough is enough. I'm going to quote from today's article. This is a dismal waste of money that could have been used to create jobs, increase assistance to the poorest, or help fund a much-needed expansion of affordable daycare for children or home care for the elderly, referring to the fact that this government has now wasted $650 million on preserving 2 seats so that they could come close to a majority, and even that didn't help them. Thank God. The fact is that because the government, first of all, made the wrong decision. See, here's the point, Speaker. This goes beyond the current decision about the minister holding back information. You see, we know why he was holding it back. Because it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to have to admit that, first of all, the decision in the first place to put those plants in those neighborhoods was fundamentally wrong. And you couldn't justify it if you tried. But they did, at great expense. The second decision that was wrong was to withhold information about the fact that it is going to cost taxpayers $650 million without getting one, not even one spark of energy out of that $650 million. And I have to go back to my constituents and have to explain to the parents of an autistic child why this government doesn't have enough money to ensure that their children can have the basics of an education so that they can learn how to eat and how to talk and how to walk. Not enough money for that, Speaker, but a lot of money to buy 2 seats so that 2 members of this legislature can take their place. I make absolutely no excuse for the fact that, yes, we're passionate about this. And I believe the people across this province are passionate about it too. And I'll tell you what else I believe. I fundamentally believe, because I know the honorable members in this place, I believe that every single member of the government who has stood up and has tried to make a lame excuse for what has gone on in the halls of this government, that they don't believe that. I believe every member here wants to do the right thing. I believe that they are embarrassed at the kind of decision-making that went on in this government. I believe they're even more embarrassed when my colleague, Mr. Fideli, stood up here and started to show what the disclosure was of the thousands of documents that finally were presented in the House, with everything that was relevant blacked out, sheets that talked about the memorandum of agreement blank. Folks, we know you're embarrassed. You have to be. My suggestion is tear up those speaking notes. Get up and talk from the heart and let us know that you disagree as well. That's what your constituents are asking you to do. Your constituents are saying, stand up for us, not the minions in the leader's office or in the premier's office. Do the right thing. That's all they're asking, for goodness sake. It doesn't take anyone with a great deal of insight to realize what's going on here. And we're appealing to you, Speaker. We're appealing to this government to understand that the people of this province see through this charade, and we in the opposition parties have a responsibility to stand up for the hardworking people in this province and to stand up for democracy, accountability, and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. For the debate, the member from Guelph.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. And, Speaker,